Show, and I am so happy to be here. I have with me a guest, Angela Worthy, and I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I'm going to do a little bit of setup as background. So this is the first of a series of conversations that we will be hosting around the needs of girls and women, particularly girls and women who are vulnerable for involvement in perhaps the criminal justice system or other forms of exploitation and vulnerability. The conversation was birthed because Tracy Parsons with the Champaign County Community Coalition has created the opportunity for us to bring in, to have a community conversation. Well, the university is bringing her in to have a conversation about and with Cyntoia Brown. And so because we always want to sort of not just have a superficial conversation or a one and done. And I don't know if people are familiar with Cyntoia's story, but I hope everyone will Google her. But she was a young woman who was impacted by human trafficking and other forms of exploitation, who ended up having a really complicated path, who ended up murdering a perpetrator, was sentenced to murder, and thanks to advocacy and her own resiliency and sort of commitment to her whole wellness and recovery, she was able to be released from prison. So she has a very, very, very compelling story. But I know when those kind of stories happen, it's very tempting to think about them as happening outside of our community or not being relevant. And as someone who came to this community at Rape Crisis Services, or what currently is RACES, I knew all too often that her story was real. It was real in our own backyard. And so I invited Angela to join me, and we had another guest who was going to join us, but this is Cootie Kid season, and so she is under the weather. The last thing that I want to say is we hope you will join us through the journey. If you're watching this on the day that we're showing it, we have a screening of Cyntoia's movie tonight for free at the Champaign County Library from 6 to 8. So if you want to do that, or else you can sort of Google her story and catch it on your own. It's worth doing it. It's great. It's great conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce Angela and remind the audience that the views and the opinions of our guest are their own. And so welcome, Angela.
Hello.
Hi. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself and maybe say a little bit about what, when I asked you to participate, beyond the fact that you work for me, what made you say yes?
I like to bring awareness, and I like to stand for women. And the only way to light a path for somebody else to heal is to show them the way. And in that, I've walked a long journey, ain't there yet, but I've come a long way in that journey. So to bring awareness and to be able to light a path for somebody else to find their healing. And you can't do that without having a conversation. So
yeah. And I want to remind the audience that if you have questions or things that you want us to talk about, please feel free to send them. We're sort of monitoring the Facebook feed, so we welcome your feedback. So tell me a little bit. I know when we mentioned Cyntoia's story, you were like super excited that we were having the opportunity. Tell me what about her story connects it to you. And then I promise I really thought about this in anticipation of this conversation. I'm not going to like have you share, and then I'm just going to sort of be the distant interviewer. I promise to be as transparent as I'm asking you to be. So tell me what sort of about her story kind of connected to you. Angela, did I lose you? Uh-oh. So the joys of Zoom. So we're having a little technical hiccup. So we've lost Angela. So I know, because this is live, I'm gonna fill in the space and hopefully she will log out and then come back and join us. So for people who've been around in the community for a while, Tracy and I know were reflecting when we had the opportunity to bring Centoya back, that we did a community showing when we had the Access Initiative. So over 10, 12 years ago, we had a huge showing, about 100 people came, and we really started at that time to have some community conversations about girls and women. We were at a period of time where there were a lot of issues and fights in the community, and we really wanted to sort of be intentional about addressing the needs of girls and women, and those needs continue. Welcome back, Angela. So I was asking, I know, technical hiccups, the love of Zoom. So I was asking, when you heard that we were bringing Centoya in, beyond just sort of using it as an opportunity to bring light to things that tend to be invisible, what about her story really connected with you?
Well, there's a lot more that goes on in this community than folks are aware of. And I've walked a journey in this community that involved some things that weren't far off from her story. I mean, I will say my privilege kept me out of jail. And I will say that there's really only one answer as to why I'm alive through what I've faced. But it's amazing to see somebody overcome when it's even deeper than what you know or what you went through. And so to see her come back and be successful and to be this amazing light, to light a path for others that have been through that, is a powerful thing. And to be able to understand or attempt to understand where she's coming from and know that I wasn't alone in some of the stuff I faced it's an amazing power. Like it gives you a sense of power within yourself to see somebody else that's already walked the path.
Yeah. So let's unpack some of that, right? So what we know from the data is that there are a lot of things that make girls and women vulnerable. And one of those things, and this has been a long-standing number, is that, right, we know that girls and women have statistically been impacted by intimate partner violence and sexual violence in a disproportionate way. And while those numbers are better, we do know that when girls and women have been sexually abused or sexually exploited, that leaves them vulnerable to other forms of harm. And so that's part of the issue. And I know I will have providers from RACES and some other community organizations on in a couple of weeks when we do the Tri-Show. But what I notice when I am working and supporting families who've been impacted by community violence, or moms who are impacted by adversity, or young girls, just so many of them that I work with and have experienced some form of sexual trauma or intimate partner violence. Has that been just something that I know you worked at Restoration and you've done a lot of like community work? Has that also been your experience? Is that many of the girls that we see most vulnerable are ones that come in with pre-existing vulnerabilities?
They really do. And I know I can't speak for everybody. Ooh, my hair is being crazy, but so I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for myself. And in my case, molestation and child abuse and neglect were a major portion of what ended up leading, because at that point, after molestation, I became homeless at 13. And have been homeless. I had to put that on a background check the other day. And it was a little triggering for me. Do I own a home? Yes, but I gave it for my children to be able to have a steady home because I knew how to live the streets and they didn't. So I've done that. I mean, just being at Restoration, even now, like being at my friend's house, yeah, I'm doing good and I'm on the path, but still to this day, I'm considered homeless, which was actually, does that mean I haven't come back? No, I've come back. I really have come back, but I'm still in the process of healing and still in the process of rebuilding everything that got took. Like, I didn't go to prison, but I might as well have been, because I was in a prison in my own state. I was in a prison in my own mind, in my own soul, until I got to restoration. And it wasn't, they had talked about CBT and DBT for the trauma, because also I was the whole way through, I was being treated for one mental health issue while I was being diagnosed for another, right? So, and I had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress and complex trauma over and over again. But that wasn't what I was being medicated for. So that type of therapy obviously wasn't doing anything. And it wasn't making me want to trust the system telling me that they wanted to help me heal either, because there was too much conflicting. So I actually learned how to walk this healing journey on my own. Just me and Jesus, really, for the most part. I've had some amazing support along the way. But for the most part, when I got to restoration, right before I got to restoration was when I heard what trauma was. And then I got to evaluating in my own healing process. Oh, wow, there's a whole lot more trauma there than what I realized as I was going through it. Like, to me, it was life. And I didn't know any different. So then other people's reactions to things I was telling them started to make sense. Like sitting down and trying to talk to somebody about the things you see, because it all started. And for me, it can go even deeper than that, because women and young ladies are objectified at very young ages, which is also the other side of the crisis that got Centoya where she was at, or even where I got myself at. And it's an area of healing that has just started. I mean, trauma is fairly new. It was just coming into play when I started my healing journey. Like I said, I had just heard the word, but so is what the industry itself and how it actually impacts women. That's just now starting to come to light as well. I can say at this time, not only am I hopeful for myself and other survivors, but you can see the change in the healing, which is what we at TRI are out for. Like all of this, even Centoya's viewing or me stepping up and saying, because I'm telling you guys, this really isn't easy for me to sit here and talk to you about right now. But in that, it's got to be done, because this is how people find their healing. This is how people see that healing is possible. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make the healing process easy, and sometimes it's hard to see. I've got one person right now that she's so amazing, but she just doesn't see the light in the healing. And part of my hope in stepping up right now and saying what I'm saying in front of the world, I mean, not that it wasn't broadcasted in the community anyway, but saying it on television in front of the world, is so that it can be seen.
Yeah.
There's people like Centoya. There's people like myself. And both, I believe Centoya, she's an advocate as well. We're willing to walk with you through it.
That's right.
To the best of our ability. You just got to give us a chance. But I know for me, I had reached the point where I was like, what do I really have to lose at this point?
Yeah. So because you went there and I told you I wouldn't make you do it alone, so I'm going to try to figure out how to say all of this like in a way, right, that is PG-13-ish.
Yeah.
But I remember, and I think I've shared this with people who've had a chance to be in a training with me, like a Trauma 101. Like, I do this work because it's personal.
Yes.
And as someone who has been through like sexual abuse and sexual trauma and the range of things. So everything from childhood sexual abuse to rape to multiple, there are lots of things, right? When you're involved, when you're vulnerable, as Angela talked about, when you're a young girl and you are in, and this is what we know from the data, when you have had early childhood sexual abuse, it's very common, unfortunately, for people to sort of prey upon that and to see that vulnerability, and for you to have other sexual abusive experiences as you get older. And I had a pretty, like, my second sexual experience was pretty traumatic, like, the kind of thing that makes people go to therapy. And and it was one of those situations where folks who were in, and I always say this, like, if people are selling drugs, and this exists even to today, but where there's drug selling, there are opportunities to exploit girls and women. And I was in a situation where people would not let me go home until I, engaged in sexual favors. And I remember at that moment, even though I had childhood sexual abuse, thinking that my whole worth, like, I couldn't go home again, right? Like, it was, like, couldn't go home again, air quotes. And I had lots of protective factors, so school, love school, education. But I just remember feeling like I was damaged, right? And that narrative stayed with me for a really long time, and led to, like, all kinds of, now that I know, I didn't know, I can tell you, like, in college, I couldn't have called it, like, maladaptive behavior. But when you believe that, one, your body's not your own, and that your worth is only in how people experience you, it can lead you into some really scary spaces. And I think, Angela, you were hinting at this. For me, it was really loving school, having a strong faith tradition, and then some miracles where I would go. And again, this is full disclosure, and I know we'll talk about this in another conversation, but, like, things would get hard. I was working at an art gallery when I was in law school, and my boss was sexually harassing me. And I just remember, I was like, I have to find another job. And I remember going to the phone and being like, I could go work at a massage place, right? And literally, I'm at the place, and I get a phone call about a different job opportunity. And I was probably that close, right? And that happened to me throughout a lot of time in my life, where when I started doing HIV and AIDS work, I did it because I knew, like, there for the grace of God go I, right? Because my story was so much like so many other people's stories. And it was really just the protective factors that I had that made a difference. And so, I could have easily seen multiple different life paths for me. And I know I do this work because I thought, like, I wanted other girls and women to have the protective factors that I had, that I knew frequently we didn't have access to, that I know made a difference, so that when bad things happen, you can recover, you can move forward, you can have a life. And it doesn't always have to be child welfare involvement and your life falling apart, if we can surround you with a village of love and support and resources, rather than just sort of demonizing and pathologizing you. Because I saw that happening to so many girls. Like, once you sort of internalize a narrative that you're not good enough, and then people in communities, the church ladies call you fast, and all of those names start to sort of circulate about, it is hard to recover. And I was like, and I saw that sort of happening in community. So I don't know.
All of it, like, and I'm sorry, like, as you're talking, like, I'm doing my best to listen and make sure that I'm hearing you so that you can be heard. Everybody needs to be heard. And as you're doing it, like, flashbacks just start occurring over and over. And it's not, and that's one of the things I try to explain to folks. Some parts of PTSD, no matter how much healing work you do, you can't control it as much as you'd like to. You can get better at controlling it, but sometimes that stuff just can't. And, you know, in my case, my story, I was an only child. So when it happened with my father, it made it to the newspaper, and with a very unique name, everybody knew who it was. And because of that, all of my safe places were gone. So in that, I was bullied at school by all of my friends, and stories were made up that were not even close to what it was. It landed me into getting in fights, and a lot of my support, even to this day, is strictly by phone. Like having feet right there isn't always a thing. But in that, like even that, like I had a Catholic church that was involved, and the Catholic church paid for the man's lawyer, and set people up to testify and lie, to the point that the punishment didn't fit the crime when all was said and done. And from there, the day he was sentenced was the day that I started being homeless on and off as it went. And I landed in some really bad places, raped at gunpoint, out in the street selling drugs, pimping females, and doing things that today I'm ashamed of. But then was survival. I didn't know what else to do. I came up out the streets. I became a technical engineer. If I ain't got no safe place, I'm gonna make me a safe place.
Yeah.
And I did all of that. And after I did all of that, the sexual assaulting and harassment and being called an American white woman and my clothing not fitting their profile, it got me laid off. And then from there, I went from having, you know, a nice income to being an at-home mom, where the tension got rough and the abuse got even greater. And when the abuse got great, you don't want to be home. So what you do? You go where the people love you. Well, they look like they love you, right? Or they act like they love you, usually because you got something that they need. And I started hustling pool tables, and from there I ran into, you know, drug dealers in town and names I trusted, and thought I was going to be good. Only it almost got me murdered.
Yeah.
It got Braden's aunt murdered, and it was listed as a suicide. And because of her history, instead of seeing her trauma, they saw her history and refused to look at the case. And for me, that set me up where a rape then occurred, and I ended up taking all of that. Instead of going to the police, instead of doing what I should have done, I internalized all of that because I felt it was my fault that she was dead.
Yeah.
And I allowed the person to do things to me that I wouldn't have normally allowed because I felt bad his family was gone. And at that time, it was my fault. Now, have I learned different since then? Yeah. Yes, I have. And thank you, Jesus, because the heaviness that it is when you live that lifestyle, I don't wish on nobody. Like, I don't even wish it on the devil himself. And then, like, to be standing here today, well, sitting here, I'm in a chair, thank you, but to be here today to tell you that I'm alive and I lived through these things, I can't tell you it really had anything to do with me or my own resiliency, but my resiliency played a part in it. Yeah. And my ability, once I got to restoration, I focused. Like the whole time that all this is going on, mind you, I'm a geek. Like I skipped 40 days of school and still made straight A's, like for the semester. So like the whole way through, I'm studying on psychology, I'm studying on depression, the bipolar, post-traumatic stress. I'm studying on everything, trying to show everybody, look, I'm telling you, I just need you to help me advocate with these people and help me get some help. Only the advocacy wasn't there. And that's where I'm thankful for Restoration Urban Ministries, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have known where to start and where to go and how to walk this healing journey out. Still ain't there yet.
Yeah. So let's talk about, because what I think, hopefully what the audience is hearing is there's some things that can make girls vulnerable. And
Yes.
when you see the signs and symptoms, if we're not attending school, if we're not where we're supposed to, if it looks like we're hypothetically promiscuous, and I
Mhm.
know at my time, like, although I wasn't necessarily doing anything, people made
Oh, yeah.
assumptions about me being
Mhm.
promiscuous, which
Still to this
I
day.
was, I know, which I was not doing
And I've
anything.
never been one. I've
That's
never been this
exactly.
promiscuous.
But if you see that if developmentally you think we're engaging in things that are not like age appropriate, if we're not dressing correctly, if I also know, because from the girls and women that I've worked with and supported, if we are fighters, if we are like overly aggressive and sometimes seem like we are constantly on guard and protecting ourselves, those are all adaptive strategies that
I'm with
when
a constant anger,
right
like
where
constant anger, like
when the world
look at
isn't
me
safe.
wrong and I'm letting you're finna hear it. Or we could end up fighting when it was all said and done. There's a
Right.
reason my kid's in the MMA.
Right. And
I'm
so
just saying.
but I think oftentimes society, communities, schools, groups, right, when they see girls engaged in certain behaviors, or even when other girls and women, because we can be really hard with ourselves, there's
Mhm.
such a critical voice that sometimes gets in the way of healing, connection, and community. And so when you see things, for first of all, a girl who is not in school is not safe, right? So just there's a vulnerability that comes from being disconnected and sort of unattended because people are predatory. And so, we should just always, that should be a red flag. And I think when you listen to most people's stories, when we're not in school, there are bad things that are happening.
I had made the comment today that if somebody would have labeled me as having trouble rather than being troubled,
Right.
that it would have been a whole different path. And I will say that there were some of them cases that because they knew I was troubled, they let me get away with some stuff that I shouldn't have gotten away with either. However, that wasn't that wasn't any healthier than being labeled the troublemaker when really I was a child screaming for help and wasn't able to find it anywhere.
Yeah. And so we're like, in some ways, tales of two stories, because I
Mhm.
was, and right. So if you think about the trauma narrative, I was the over involved in everything, leader, people pleaser, great student, always pleasant, never had a negative emotion, which is also should be a red flag for those of you when somebody is sort of gotta get it right and
Mhm.
hyper vigilant and always, again, people pleasing. And so just know, although society tends to reward one set of behavior, it can often come from the same wounded place. And so I know when I'm working with schools, I'm like, please see girls, right? Please see them in all of their complexity. And I'll never forget, I once had I was diagnosed as having dyslexia later on in my life. And when I went back to school, and they were like, well, we knew you had some like social stuff, but we just chalked it up to like you being a Black girl, or you being whatever. They didn't think like, well, there could actually be something there, right? They didn't see me. So right. So I want to make sure we're highlighting it. The other thing that I want to make sure we're highlighting is that things that we know protect us. Loving learning, even if you're not good at it, even if but just a love of learning and providing girls and women opportunities to sort of be seen, to succeed, to, take chances, to not be in some box, right? Like that. Having some safety, having some faith belief, right? Having space to think and breathe where you don't have to worry about violations or performing or whatever, where people really sort of see and believe in all of your possibilities. And then also having people who give you language for your experience. Because I thought, Angela, what you said was pretty powerful. Like, you had been through so much stuff and no one had told you that those were traumas. You didn't have language for it. And most of it, you just sort of internalized as sort of being your bad behavior or your
Not just bad behavior, because I was also being told by, the church I was raised in was that, if this stuff was going on, you had to be doing something wrong. There's a whole nother piece to that I don't want to get into today, but I learned that when I came to restoration, that no, that's not exactly how this works. Now, did I get myself into some of that stuff? Yes, I did. But in that really wasn't the case at all. Ooh,
what?
it lost me. Hold on.
Uh-oh, you're still here with me.
I got you.
You're still here.
Okay.
So you could just keep talking. You're
There
still
it goes.
here.
Okay, I'm back. All right. I don't even know what just happened. My screen just went all the way out and now I brought it back. So, okay. Where was I at?
So you were just saying that one of the things that had happened was that you were also connected to a faith community.
Oh,
that
yes.
Also, yeah.
And and so the one thing that ended up bringing me all the way back around was love. And what I realized is that I hadn't in fact been taught love. And in fact, I had been taught that, well, the way I felt was that nothing I ever did was going to be enough to be loved. So a lot of the internalization ends up making you feel worthless and hopeless. And like, you're never going to come out of this. I know for me, I remember a letter that I wrote when I got to restoration where I described my life as a merry-go-round that was spinning out of control, and I didn't know how to make it stop. It's stopped now, and I'm enjoying the ride. Does that mean that it's all the way done going in circles? No, but to come out of that and for somebody to recognize what was going on and start to show me a way, or at least, where I could start looking for myself. Because one of the things, like you had mentioned, having the time in yourself, and that's one thing that I'm the self-preservation. I'm not saying I was really good at it, but getting that solitary time to myself and not even realizing that it was a relationship with God at that point, but having that time in myself throughout all of that. And that dialogue in my relationship with him was actually the stuff that got me through. Only I didn't know that then. I didn't understand that because the knowledge wasn't there. As the knowledge has over the years now begun to develop and I've walked it, and look, growth doesn't come from comfortable situations or conversations. And in this, you got to feed yourself everything right. And there's some days that I have to sit there and be like, okay, what are my affirmations for today? Well, you guys saw me too in the beginning of this. I'm sitting here doing my breathing exercises just to do what I know I'm supposed to do. And the thing is still to this day, folks don't always recognize when I'm having a hard time. And I've gotten my whole life, I've gotten good at keeping calm and trying to do the whole healthy communication thing, thinking it was going to help. But most of the time, it's not until I'm all the way spun out that folks recognize that there's a problem. And that's part of my thing, is that most people then don't know what to do once somebody is spun out, because they don't always recognize even the things that we were just talking about. So most people don't realize that if you see somebody yelling, more than likely there's some anxiety going on there, because, anger is always our secondary emotion. And 9 times out of 10, the primary emotion of the moment is going to be anger. But one of the questions I've learned to ask myself in those moments is, what am I scared of in that moment? And And 9 times out of 10, it's also going to come back to some form of the abuse that was endured during the time previous to the healing. Because not always does our body recognize the difference between when it was the actual trauma and when an emotion hits that's somewhat similar, but not quite as serious. Our body doesn't recognize that. For example, for me, I went and did a zip line thingy not too long ago. And I remember a time when I could ride fair rides all day long, and it was the best thing for me. And then after that, like right before I went to restoration, I tried to get on a ride, and it wasn't happening. And I'm like, and it was the swings. I was like, what in the world? Like, I never had this problem before in my life. What is wrong with me? Well, I learned, and I used the zip line. Before I got to the zip line, there was exercises that I had taught myself before I got there to train myself that this was a good excitement, this wasn't a danger excitement, and that this was part of my healing journey, which then changed the experience going down the zip line and allowed me to have, like, I actually ended up screaming, which is not, and in that though, it was healing. But the thing is we have to be self-aware, as well as in that moment, I also had a whole team of people that were there, trauma informed, that were helping me walk that path. And that's another thing. And they're like, everybody's always like, pick up your boots. Okay, but there's something standing on them. I'm going to need you to help me get the stuff off my boots before I can put them on.
Absolutely.
And that was one of those moments. I need somebody to help me put on my boots before I go down this thing and walk on my journey.
Love that sharing, first of all, and your enthusiasm in sharing it. And so to highlight having a sense of community, having skills. I know we spent a lot of time in TRI sort of teaching those affect regulation, those coping skills, those feel better, because, right, so many individuals that we serve and support just didn't have the tools in their toolbox, like how to work on that self-talk, how to keep yourself calm. So what I have a couple of things I want to ask, or like have us talk about, not necessarily ask. So if you were, so I'm going to ask you to speak to two separate audiences. So if you were talking to stakeholders and you wanted them to have a better understanding of what girls and women in our local community need from, again, we can't speak about every single individual, but more universally, particularly ones who are vulnerable, who might be impacted by both attendance, by attendance issues or child welfare or transition, or maybe they're involved with the criminal justice system, any of those things. What do you think stakeholders might be missing, and what would you want them to notice and attend to?
I think one of the biggest things for me, even right now, is safety, and safety in a person. I think for me, still, my thing is I just need one person.
Yeah.
And whether that's state-based or whether that's community-based, that one person that you can trust, that you know you're safe with, and whether that person helps you advocate or not, or at least walks alongside you as you self-advocate. I think that's a major piece in this community that is being worked on, but it needs to be expanded greatly.
Absolutely. So, want to do a plug for programs like the Well Experience that has created a safe space for girls and women, and When Recovery. And then there are a couple of programs that are family centered, but clearly we need more of them, because I feel like sometimes we don't have enough space for the needs of girls and women to feel safe and to be seen, particularly girls and women who have more of a complicated narrative. Sometimes I think, right, we only create space for like the converted, not for the in progress. So anything else?
Another one that actually just came to mind, is we used to have a thing called Roundhouse around here, but the problem with that is it was housed by the same people that were employed by the the same folks that were causing some of the trauma at the time is the easiest way to say it. Now that agency has grown as well. However, that there is nothing like that here in this town anymore. And we have some amazing youth programs, but some of those youth programs aren't going to be utilized by the young folks that I'm speaking of right now that don't have a safe place at home, don't have anywhere to turn to, maybe couch hopping just to keep a roof over their head, or babysitting somebody else's children to make sure they're covered. You know, those are big things, and it's an area in our community that I feel needs addressed. And when in that, it needs to be staffed by folks that the children will be comfortable with when they have to come and tell somebody that there's something going on at home, or that they can't go home, and feel safe in creating a journey for themselves in healing.
I love that. And I want to just sort of co-sign. So, you know, and again, the data shows this, like when, particularly young adults, I think anytime between that 16 to like 22, 23 age, who are trying to figure it out, when they can have a safe community of people who help build skills. And although we have it a little bit, Cunningham Children's Home has a transitional age youth program, and they have a homeless and runaway youth program, but the capacity is never enough.
It's not enough.
And when we a couple years ago, our peer ambassadors did a survey of young moms who about their needs, and the stories they told us around, as you said, couch surfing, the things that they would have to do to keep a safe place, the compromising and negotiation where you date someone slightly older for security. I was taking the bus yesterday, and at the bus station, and one of the guys who was on the phone while I was sort of standing outside was talking about, he was saying it kind of critically, and he didn't get the need, but he was saying how he's meeting so many girls who are like staying with people who are homeless, maybe sex offenders, outside and in kinds of dangerous situations because they don't feel safe in their mother's homes. And he was saying that as like a judgment, and I was listening to it from like, do you know how sad it would be that you would feel safer under the viaduct than in your mom's home? Like, that says a lot about our need to create better, safer, secure places where people, and again, where they can be loved on unconditionally, so that you don't have to come in any certain way. So you're so I'm not going to require you necessarily to be clean or drug free or and we don't have time to talk about this conversation, or even necessarily completely separating your ties from people who are perpetrators because of this whole trauma bonding. That could be a journey, but imagine, as you were saying, Angela, if I just love on you consistently and predictably, and you have a safe place to land until you're ready, is what we know that works, but we don't tend to create that.
No, and there's the constant thing I hear in this community, no matter where I'm working, no matter who I'm providing resources for, no matter what I'm doing, is that there's not enough. There's not enough resources. There's not enough resources. There's not enough resources. So, I mean, us as a community, I mean, we're working on it. I've seen some major growth. Again, I've seen some major growth, but there's a lot of areas that still need a lot of growth in order for the resources to be available to do the healing work that you see so many people in the news comments section claiming that they need and want in our community. And we all claim we need and want that in our community. But in order for us to get there, not only do we need the resources, but we need the feet in the streets to help us get there.
Yeah. And people to have the skills and the capacity, and we also have to see it. So, you know, I think in the last few years, we've been talking a lot about like community violence, and all too often that is only like looked at through the lens of boys and men. And we don't think about the needs of girls and women in that. And we haven't even talked about like trans women and all of the complications that kind of come up with, you know, again, girls across the spectrum. So the other thing that I want to ask you about, and I think we still have enough time to talk about it, is, so if you were gonna talk not just to stakeholders, but maybe to girls, women, moms, individuals who are trying to figure it out, what advice would you give to them for people who are like, who see you in the streets and they're like, I didn't know you had a story or whatever? What would you say to girls and women? Maybe you're right. Yeah.
So the thing I always tell them is you're worth it. You're worth it. It doesn't matter how hard the journey is or how hard the process is. It doesn't matter what we got to dig through. It doesn't matter how we got to get there, but you are worth it. You are worth every step it's going to take for you to heal. You are worth it. And there are people in this community that do give themselves and will walk with you. There are safe people. I'm one, and Karen's another. Will walk with you. We've been putting ourselves out here, and we're willing to walk through whatever. But it's going to take them being ready. I had this talk with somebody today. It's going to take you being ready, because I can't want it more for you than you want it for yourself.
Yeah. And I'm going to sort of co-sign a little bit, but to say like, come, because you don't have to be ready. Right. So that's the other
At
thing.
least show up.
We talk about a little bit about
show up and you'll get ready.
Right. If you're thinking about wanting something different, let's start to have some conversations. Let's build some capacity, and know that the other thing that I don't do a good enough job, I'm kind of making up a word, about doing this, is to know that just because someone might show up and you see them in a place, to not necessarily assume that they also don't have a story, or they're also not relatable, or that they don't get it. And so know that many women, unfortunately, have a story to tell. And there's a quote that I love that says, Marianne Williams says, if one woman told the truth about her life, the whole world would bust wide open. And I don't think that people realize just how complex, and particularly women who are feeling on the margins, feeling disconnected, feeling unwanted, feeling invisible. I want to bring this full circle, but I know so many of the moms that we've supported, and you've seen this, Angela, have been have had complex stories. They've had their own traumas. They've had their own experiences with intimate partner violence. They've had their own vulnerabilities, and frequently no one sees them, right? They might see their
son. A lot
son.
of times they don't even see themselves, just like me. They don't see themselves or see that as being an abuse or see that as being a trauma, because like with me, in a lot of cases, it's all we knew. So you don't know that there's better until somebody tells you there's better and starts to show you the way.
Yeah. Love this conversation. And I realized that we've talked for a long time. And one of the other things that I think we probably needed to bring up, and I'm trying to figure out how to bring this up after we've had this full conversation, is, I think we've hinted at it, but one of the things that Cyntoia's story highlights that I wanted to be sure you and I talked about was, what does, and again, this is a buzzword, and I think you were hinting at it, what does commercial sexual exploitation or human trafficking look like in 2023 in Champaign-Urbana, particularly for girls and women of color? And I'm going to put you in the women of color, because I think based on the data, girls and women who are from economically disadvantaged or from communities that have experienced adversity sort of get in the same sort of bucket. So what do
Mhm.
you think? What does that mean?
See, like I got out like at a good time for me. Actually, what I've seen out in walking the streets is actually getting worse. And I'm a firm believer that it is the traumas that are continuously going down through generations after generations that have brought us here. But I do also know that if we can go generations deep in trauma, we can go generations deep in healing. And that's why I'm here. That's why you're here. That's why we're out here to do what we do, because we can turn this around and we can send healing through our community and bring better lives for our children and their children. The game stops here.
So that was so positive. I love it. So, and I'm going to take 2 seconds and bring us back just one step, because I want to make sure, because I know people who might see Cyntoia's story or whatever, there are all kinds of, when people hear human trafficking, they have an image about what that means. And I don't know if well, there's lots of reasons why I have that as a different image. In part, I had a stepfather who was a little eccentric. And so we bonded by him taking me, this was in Florida, we'd go to the Waffle House and watch women engaged in prostitution. That was our family bonding, like, which of course, you know, is part of grooming. But but that was our bonding time. So I have seen girls and women in my neighborhood, I've in extended family, who've engaged in all kinds of exchange of sex for money,
Drugs,
for rent,
alcohol.
for housing, for yeah, right. So, and in that exchange, right, bodies become commodities and people kind of figure it out. And I think a lot of times when people hear like trafficking, they think there are people who don't go home, or that they're all like huddled up in some like barn or basement or whatever, and they don't realize that a girl could go to school, or a mom could come home, or she could take care of her kids and still have somebody who is directing the work, profiting from the work, using trauma bonding to motivate people to do the work, and that it isn't like in a movie. I guess I wanted to make sure that we talked about it, because
It's
again,
everyday life.
right? I think people think about it looking like, again, some people in a trailer, but it
No,
is.
and that we could, because we can also, this is where we've been digging down deeper a little bit to it, try too, where most of this stuff comes with addiction.
Yeah.
And in that, some of these ladies are out here doing what they do and don't even realize what they're doing to themselves, but they in fact are trafficking themselves. And whoever is supplying their needs at that time, no matter what that need may be, that's who's trafficking them. Just because it's got a label that most people don't put it under doesn't make it any less than what it is, right? Because, you know, the way our society is set up is that if a young lady is doing something of those things, then, you know, she's got to be the one at fault or whatever. But the reality of the situation is the men are the one that are preying on women who are self-medicating in these situations. And
But and you have to self-medicate if you're constantly, right, if you're constantly feeling violated, it costs you something. And so it's very tempting to want to kind of numb that out. And you know, when we think about post-traumatic stress disorder, people forget one of the hallmarks is dissociation, right? And so some people do it because they can check out like mentally. Some people do it by drugs. Some people do it through other forms of addiction, but it is all a hallmark of what happens when, you know, when you've been,
trauma occurs.
yeah, when you've been particularly overwhelming trauma that overwhelms your ability to cope.
It really is. And I know for myself, addiction became a thing, but it was also medically induced. And it was medically induced because of trauma that was occurring. And it was another woman who was traumatized that got me there too. And it was a lookout. Yeah, it was great at the time, but it also ended up causing more problems. And the addictions become really real out of that, even out of some of the stuff that the doctors have to give you to help you. Addictions can occur. And once it's a natural thing to not want to feel those feelings. But one of the things that I've learned along the way is that the healing is in the feeling.
Oh,
Once
absolutely.
I learn to feel my way through the hurt, through the grief, through however I felt in the moment, learning to feel those feelings in a healthy manner and how to let them go in a healthy manner, did better than any of them drugs could ever do.
Oh, absolutely. But so this, it's one of the reasons why I know and first of all, Try is not like unique, but many organizations that are looking at trauma partner with looking at substance use, because when you understand how trauma dysregulates the nervous system, how it changes your awareness of pain, how it changes you neurobiologically, if you're educated and informed about it, and also have doctors who are educated and informed about it, they can make better decisions. And they can say, hey, when you take this opioid, you might feel relief. And some of that's pain, but if you've got a trauma narrative, it might provide relief in a whole different way that isn't about the physical pain, it's about your emotional pain. And if you keep wanting to sort of have that numbed out, that is a great time for me to connect you with a trauma-specific intervention and therapist, right? But we haven't really moved in that direction. But I know Try is like hoping to partner with medical providers more and more, or the health system, just because we know and we've experienced, right, so many individuals we serve and support who don't get the care that they need because people don't see their full humanity, their full complexity of needs, and that leaves them vulnerable. All right, so we have like just a few minutes. I feel like we've had this wide-ranging conversation, and it has been so great to talk to you, Angela. What are your closing thoughts? I mean, again, we're having this series of conversations about the needs of vulnerable women and girls who can be hope-filled. What would be your final thought? Anything you'd like to share?
I just want folks to know that healing is possible, and that it doesn't matter what your story looks like. It doesn't matter how bad the trauma is. It's there. And again, there are people here willing to walk it out for you. Knowledge is power. So the first thing we got to do is get you knowledge in what you're going through, and some coping mechanisms. Again, my favorite's bubble breathing, but but healing's possible. And I think that by having shows like this, the community then gets the knowledge it needs, and it starts to generate the power that is needed to obtain the things that we need within the community to do the work that needs to be done. And like, I saw a comment the other day, and there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes that a lot of people just don't realize is being done. And nobody's in it for news coverage. Nobody's in it for all of that. Now, does that come with the territory? Yeah, it does, because everybody's wanting to get to a point where they're healing. Healing's a new thing. It's one of the things I teach on a regular. Healing is the new success. The fruit of the spirit: peace, joy, love, the things that everybody desires as basic needs in life. That's the new successful, and we're getting there, but it takes a process. And our community started this process a couple years back. We're well into that journey, but there's still a long journey to go for us to get there. Can we get there faster? Yeah, we can, but it's going to take more resources and it's going to take more feet in the street to get that done, and more people willing to lay down labels, prejudgments, and all of that stuff, and put their heart out there with a level of love and compassion that is meant to heal.
Love it. So Angela, thank you so much for your transparency, for your sharing. We will be posting information about resources, local resources, just in case if you're somebody who wants to reach out, we want you to know where you can go for help. There are hotlines. There are big campaigns. We'll bring somebody in from the state regional human trafficking coalition. If you see something, say something. If you see somebody who looks like they're out of place or could need help, reaching out, being kind and compassionate. And if you are watching this live, we hope you'll join us tonight at Champaign Public Library to see Cyntoia's story. And then also we hope you'll come back here. So in a couple of weeks, I will have individuals who are sort of stakeholders and providers talk about some of the things that are happening locally, and also looking at this issue not just for girls of color, and I should have done stats and facts around how many girls go missing, but also looking at this issue as it impacts girls and women, and individuals who are immigrants, or are having a huge are definitely vulnerable for exploitation. So stay tuned, join us again in a couple weeks, and we wish you well. Thank you.